Yeah, I'll just get you to frame that with me though.
Mm-hmm.
First.
Is there a way to turn the screen on?
This one's on. Oh, so yeah, just the power button up here. Let me just flick that.
Already is on. Oh.
Okay, and then just line me up, and then the recording button's there. Yeah.
On the side there, yes. Okay. And you want to be like,
I want to be like centres there, sort of thing, you know.
yes, you're kind of like the
Can you go that way?
so middle square,
Mm-hmm.
the intersection
Of the
of
third.
the top left
Yep.
is like middle of your forehead.
Yep. But do you need to zoom me out or whatever?
So you want to be in like the left side of the middle.
Correct. The third, basically, yeah.
Yeah. And how much, how close do you want to see? Do you want to see the table?
No,
Just above the table?
probably, yeah. So they're here.
Just above your arm? Yeah.
Yep. Good.
I think so.
And recording.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay, now it's recording.
Definitely recording.
Definitely recording. I'm no film major, so hopefully that's alright.
All right. Okay, all right. Good.
Okay.
All right, so today we're going to go through, basically everything, at least from a base level knowledge perspective, everything to understand about investing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you know, what is money, what are markets, the role of different players in markets, primary, secondary markets, you know, things like bonds versus shares, you know, say investing in shares versus investing in portfolios. We'll look at things like index versus active investments. We'll look at even things like derivatives, futures, some of those things as well, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think what we'll do is we'll roll through and I'll try and take you through what are all the basics, all the things I think you need to know and understand. We can talk a little bit about how that relates to things like small business as opposed to just say listed companies and stuff. Talk a little about debt. And even things like diversification and some investment portfolio strategies, all right? Okay. All right, so let's start with, well, what do we mean by investing? So what I mean by investing is you can think of almost like investing is using money to make money. Okay, so deploying what I would call financial capital. So capital that's there to just generate a financial return, just to generate more money. Okay. And basically the way that happens is essentially that capital gets deployed in a way that creates some value. And there's really only two ways to do that. One is some sort of entity trades something, assembles a bunch of products. We'll use gravity as an example, right? You assemble some ingredients into a product, sell it to consumers who think that's a refreshing beverage, something they want to do and consume. And as long as you do that and the cost of doing all that is less than what people are willing to pay for the benefit they get, whatever that is, then the business makes money, you've added value as determined by the market, there's some profit in that. As long as you can continue to do that sustainably, then you have a viable business, right? The other main type of asset is what we call the utility asset, right? And that is something like property is a good example of that, right? So I would say property is a utility asset because the value it generates is based on how it's utilised, okay? And if you change the way it's utilised, then you'll change the relative value of that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So they're the two main types of investments. And we can talk about infrastructure and different types of companies or entities, whatever, but essentially they're the same thing. Is this asset creating value, or is this thing creating value because of how it's physically utilised, i.e. a toll road or a commercial property or a house, right? Or is it a result of ideas and efforts of people, what I would call human capital, and physical capital, you know, whether it's office space or plant and equipment or whatever it is, being utilised in some way to add value, assemble a product or create a services or write code, whatever it may be, is the value created that way? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then investment markets, share market, bond markets, whatever, are just ways of trading the relative ownership of things in those markets, that access the value created in those things, be they shares in a company or debt, etc. Okay. And so money, the commodity of exchange we use as a way of exchanging things of value, okay. We can talk a little bit about what money is and how it's created and all those sorts of things, but essentially you can think of money as the most efficient way to exchange things of relative value. Okay, so rather than you do something that might be valuable to some people but not valuable to me, and I do something that's valuable to you that we want to exchange, well, how do we do that? There's no easy compatibility.
Yeah, if all I make is bread.
Yeah, if you're a bread maker and I don't like bread, or I like bread but I only like a small bit of bread.
Yeah, sure.
And you're so good at making bread that, you know, it's the best value you can create isn't to make your own clothes and grow your own food and build your own house. It's to make bread and to exchange that bread to everyone, right? Now, we need ways of, and I breed goats or I build buildings or whatever it is I do, we don't need to exchange that. Okay, so money was developed as a commodity of exchange. Okay.
Instead of one toenail of the goat for one slice of bread.
Instead of us chopping up, correct, right? So, and obviously, because if you think about the way an economy works, all an economy is the result of all the individual trades that people make of exchanging their relative value. Okay? Because if you think about it, everyone's trading, we can define them as resources, right? Defining resources, things that are valuable to somebody, that's what a resource is. Okay? But all resources are the end result of some process. Okay? There's no such thing, other than maybe oxygen, there's no such thing as a natural resource. There's no such thing as a resource that's abundantly available in the right format, in the right way, at the right time for everyone to use. Okay, and I know we talked about even water, for example. So there's almost no fresh, safe water anywhere in the world.
Where you just go and drink it.
Where you can just go and drink it to your heart's content. Okay, but there's more than enough water. There's just an unbelievable volume of water on the planet.
Just full of salt.
It's in the wrong place. It's in the wrong format. It's got stuff in it we don't want, right? So you can treat water and turn it into that end product, but then the process of turning that raw raw commodity or raw asset, whatever you want to call it, right, raw resource, right, into an actual resource, a productive resource, a resource you can use, right, there's a process involved. And that process always, every single thing you can ever think of is used as a resource, be it food to metal to the stuff that made...
I'm trying to rack my brain of something that you could use with zero processing, even...
Oxygen.
Pretty much.
Yeah, so everything.
Even food that's growing in the ground, are they...
No, 100%.
Like
fruit on the tree, like, okay, great.
But it's been modified over 1,000 years of, like, you know, corn nowadays looks very different.
But even if you said, okay, we all live in the Garden of
degree.
Eden, right? And there's abundant food everywhere. Okay, that will only sustain so many people in so many places.
Sure, and
right,
ripe apples are...
Okay, or food you can actually hunt without starving to death chasing the thing. Okay, you know, grass you can eat, whatever it may be, right? So human beings have evolved because we've got very, very good at turning things that are raw resources, the potential, because again, food is energy, right? That's okay. So let's go back a step. So you can think of to turn any raw potential, whether it's, you know, the metal that becomes the alloy that makes this thing, or the food that allows you to get up and walk around, right? You can think of the creation of that in the way that you want. Everything's a process. Okay, and that process requires a technology and some energy. Okay, now you could argue that the technology is in the plant that created the apple or banana or kind of whatever, right? But again, that's not going to create a resource that's abundant enough for you to realistically use for us to call what we could realistically call a resource that has, because it doesn't have reliability.
So technology in this kind of definition is the transformation or the process of things.
Yeah, technology is a process of turning components into something else.
Whether that's a
right?
natural, whether it's photosynthesis.
Well, so part of
it's
the, I don't know, we've talked about this, right? But let's just pull the natural thing apart, right? So, for example, most people would regard anything that's biologically created, okay, internal to an organism, is natural. Okay, so the fructose produced inside the tree to make the fruit, natural. Okay, but the fructose synthesized in a lab, right? Not. Even though it was synthesized by a human being, in this case, still bring that, let's say,
same molecule,
forming proteins out of amino acids, forming the same molecule, or at least as we would define it, right? By assembling them external to your body, right? As opposed to using machines, right? Or, beakers or whatever, to create protein. We would regard that as not as natural as when you ingest those amino acids, either as part of a complex protein that you then break down and reassemble, or as base amino acids that are assembled in your body to create muscle protein or collagens or whatever else is made in your body, or hormones, whatever. So we would regard that assembly process of making sugars or proteins or lipids inside your body as natural, okay? The muscle that we eat of the cow, we call beef and eat, that's a natural product. But if you make if you're using soy proteins and some of these things, we regard that as unnatural. Does that make sense? Now, they have different effects and different impacts. We can talk about that, but it's an interesting delineation to say, it's natural because it's produced internal to an organism. It's unnatural because an organism produced it externally. Does that make sense?
I feel like often people use the word like unnatural, or they use something natural because there's a process that exists that has the same result that isn't.
Yep. Yeah. So I guess the point of all this is we need
processes are processes.
Okay.
Everything gets processed.
Exactly. So when we're talking about things, you have to be really careful about almost everything is a process from somewhere to somewhere. And normally when we're talking about something, we're just taking a snapshot at that point in time. Okay. We're taking a snapshot at the point in time of the apple before you eat it and so on and so on. Okay. So but just to be mindful of everything's a process, and all processes involve energy and some degree of technology, whether it's a natural, biological technology or human energy, however we want to describe it, right? So we just need to be mindful of that, I suppose, because I guess what I'm saying is, from a point of view of what human beings would regard as resources, things that are useful, okay, they are always the result of some process. You can't just go and grab them off a tree. They're not abundantly available sitting on the ground. So they require some degree of energy and technology, okay, and that's what we would define as productivity. Okay, so all resources are the result of productivity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well then the productivity is what drives the process. And the process is what turns the
raw ingredients into something you can call a resource.
Yes.
Yeah. Right?
Even the apple on the tree needs to be picked.
Yeah, maybe washed and peeled and cut up and turned into a pie, right?
Yeah. Cooked, etc.
Okay. So think about resources as the end result. The end result of a process, or at least the result of a process, and one resource might then be an input into another process. Yes, you've refined copper and I've now got pure copper, but now that's going into this to make a copper wire, or it's going into this to make a battery or whatever.
I picked the apple, which is now a resource in itself,
it's
going into an apple pie.
Correct.
Which is through another process, which is then another resource.
Right. And at each stage, the nature of the resource changes, but there's always some degree of technology and energy.
And the value changes depending on if you like a raw apple or if you prefer an apple pie.
Okay, and so in reality, you can think of value generation as the culmination of the right things based on someone else's, either, in some cases, objective experience, because you need shelter or whatever, but often, and more often, value is a subjective experience. I like having a big screen TV or a computer you know what I mean? So,
yeah, and the whether they call it natural or whether they call it whatever the process is kind of subjective, right?
Well,
So the process is objective, but the value assigned to the resource before and the resource after are subjective.
is almost always mostly subjective in terms of that's the biggest variability in something, right? Because how you would use that copper versus how I would use a copper, how you use apple versus I use apple, there can be some objective difference in that.
Yes.
But a lot of will ultimately, and the biggest difference is subjective. Like if I arrange some pigments on canvas, most people would say the canvas has lost some value, right? But when some bloke called Vincent missing an ear did, people lost their minds.
They lost their minds well after he died.
Sure, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
right.
no,
So,
of course, yeah.
so
He had a pretty rough going when he was
so the
alive.
subjective part of that. Okay. So again, this is a very detailed way of saying it, but I think it's really, really important because if you understand the nature of, not just the components, but the nature of them. So what I'm really talking about, I'm really talking about saying, okay, well, when we're talking about resources, resources are wealth. Okay. Because really all wealth is your ability to command the use of resources. Okay, and I know we've talked about this before, but
whether you want to keep them the same.
so
or
whether you
process them
own
or
them under some sort of legal scenario, because in reality that's even just an arrangement we all agree on. Okay, at the end of the day, whether I own them and I can deploy them, or whether I'm the medieval king, and I can just say to all my lords, I'm taxing you, you have to give me some of your grain or food or whatever, or you need to tell all of your peasants, who aren't kind of even yours necessarily, but you have influence over them, they need to come and form my army and we need to go and, you know, spread the gospel or take over that land or defend ourselves against the Viking, whatever else we do. So as the king, I'm as powerful as the resources I can command. Not necessarily what I own. I might own the whole country and everyone says, get stuffed, we're not fighting your war, we're not feeding you. Then owning the whole country is, I'm really not that.
And then if everyone's, we're not going to fight for you, they're not really a resource anymore.
Correct. Well, they're not a resource I command, and therefore I'm not wealthy. That's not wealth I have.
Yeah.
But also, keep in mind that it's the relative impact of that.
The resources that you can utilise.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm a medieval king and I command the entire English continent, I'm probably nowhere near as wealthy as a modern day person with a drone, an AR-15, you know, and prepper stash full of beans. You know what I mean?
AR-15 becomes pretty useless without bullets, though.
Well, you know, but I've got a prepper stash, so I've got unlimited. You know, well, I've done my whole Far Cry thing, and I'm loaded to bear, right? So again, that technology suddenly makes me, you know, I've got a couple of Predator drones.
That's those
you know,
videos of Normandy, but you have an A12 Warthog.
that's right. You'd only need probably one's enough, right?
One would be fine.
One's enough, right?
I think those bullets would go through those bunkers.
No problem.
Easily.
That's exactly what they're doing. Well, they go through modern versions, something like that, especially uranium depleted core. Okay, so you can see the impact of technology has an impact on the nature of wealth.
Would have saved some lives if they had a Warthog back then. Would have saved at least.
Probably wouldn't have needed Normandy if
Allies'
they'd had a
lives.
Warthog because they could have gone in earlier.
Sure.
But so technology is a huge influence then on the relative value of resources, both objectively and subjectively. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, what do we mean by wealth? So wealth is ultimately then productivity. Okay, and productivity is a function of energy. The more energy you have, the more productive you can be, and therefore the more wealth you're going to have.
Because the productivity is how you transform your resources, or use them, or utilise them.
Correct. And that energy is the major driver. The more energy you have, the more productive you can be. Doesn't guarantee you, because there's other components to that.
You don't get up.
If you don't have smarter ideas and better technology and so on and so on. So energy is a necessary but insufficient condition for optimizing wealth. The more of you have, the more wealth you have. Okay? So in reality, you can think therefore as wealth as, think of energy leads to productivity, productivity is wealth. Okay? So whenever we talk about wealth, and ultimately we talk about money as a store and a transfer of wealth, because you can think of then money, the commodity, I'm now talking dollars, as the commodity exchange of that wealth because it's the ability to command resources.
It's not actually the resource.
It's not the resource, but it's the ability to command it. And while it has that power, while we agree that it commands, I'll accept that US dollar, Australian dollar, whatever it is, right? Then it has power. As soon as it doesn't command that, it is of no use. Okay, and that's why if we go back through history, Neil Ferguson's got a really good book on this called The Ascent of Money, right? And it talks about, basically leads you through many of the things in history that have been used as commodity exchange, from beads to, you know, literally like flowers to, you know, corns. Anything you can possibly think of as a commodity has been used as a commodity exchange for money. Okay. We talk a little bit about when we get into fiat currency and crypto and some of those sort of things, right? But you can think of whatever that unit is that we're using, you can think of that as that is the power to command resource.
And it's only when everyone agrees that
well, all I need is the people I want to exchange resources to agree. I don't need everybody.
Sure.
But sure, the more universal, the better.
And yeah, the Vikings rocked up to England, and if they tried to give them pounds, great British pounds, Vikings would be like, what are we doing with this?
Yeah, correct. Because if you can think about it, the commodity exchange that you give me, because I'm giving you real resources, right? You're just giving me a potential to acquire resources. Okay, so that potential, I have to weight the risk of that. So if I think the potential for me to go and get the things I need is really high because it's accepted everywhere, then that's a reasonably valuable commodity exchange. Okay, whereas if it's not, maybe not accepted the places I want to go, or may not be accepted by the time I get there, or may be accepted at a different value to what I thought, its price is volatile, then the risk of the transaction is greater for me. So therefore I'm going to discount the value of that. I want more of those things, or I want a bunch of different things. I want diversified payments so that I have less risk. Does that make sense? So it is in everyone's interest to have a singular commodity exchange because it's the most efficient way and we can trade most safely and most
easily.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do we want in that commodity exchange? We want that universality, but most importantly, we don't want the value of that to be very volatile.
No.
Especially over time. Okay, because then as a store of value, because keep in mind that money isn't just a commodity of exchange, it's a store of value while I wander around wondering what resources I want, so it's going to store value to me. So I don't want that value to decay very quickly, do I?
No.
Right? I want it to, now, it doesn't necessarily have to last forever, but I want to have a known rate of decay and or no rate of decay. Does that make sense? All right? So I want that, okay? Because it's also, that then becomes a unit of accounting. I can measure wealth in that thing. And again, if that price is moving, its relative value is moving rapidly, not only is it not a very good commodity exchange now because I can't store very well, but I also can't account very well. What are you worth today? 25, 77, 14. You know what I mean? I don't know. Does that make sense? Mm. So in my commodity exchange...
You're buying bread and... Wait. Oh.
But not only that, everything else in the balance sheet is rapidly going like this as well.
So bread's 350. I got 280. Oh, 370. Oh, no, it's back down to 280. 370. Oh, yeah, quick, I'll get in.
So imagine if it's almost like if you're sitting there and trading the commodities market during the day, and you have to report to the bank the net worth of your pantry as the price of beans and like, you know what I mean? It's like, and the bank's like, I need to know. It's like, okay, so you need to understand that when we talk about commodity exchange, there are really important factors that people don't necessarily, they're not front of mind. It's like a dollar's a dollar, right? Okay, so.
Right now,
okay, all right. So investing then, right, is going to take that store of value, right, and it's going to say, well, I can't deploy that in a productive way. Can someone else deploy that? Can I use it to acquire the right to that utility, that land, okay, that then someone can live on or raise cattle or put an airport on, whatever it is, right? So someone else is going to change the utility. Now, that someone else could still be me, but then it's the nature of doing the thing on the land that creates that utility, not the land itself. Does that make sense? Because land is just land. Now, different land has different potential for utility. Can't put an airport on some land, right? But the land, it's not the land that creates the value, it's the utility. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hence, if I take what was Canberra, a good example, originally just bush. They came along, cleared it, dammed a river, filled in, made a lake. Here's a city. The land around that lake now is significantly greater value. Manhattan was sold for a bunch of beads, right? So the utility of that land, as that changes, it becomes more valuable, okay? Based on what can be done and what is done on it. Whereas we look at something more like, say, a business venture, the assembly of things, the deployment of ideas and efforts of people using plant and equipment, physical capital, especially if you then generate systems around that can leverage those two things, then you end up with something that can spin off a lot of value and, McDonald's or Amazon or Boeing or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but in all of those cases, they all require resources. We need to employ people, we need plant and equipment. And so investing, you can think of that as supplying the money, the financial capital, that then allows those things to be acquired and used, which allows the leverage, allows the value in the business, right? So as an investor, I'm supplying some financial capital that allows the resource, in this case the resource being physical or human capital, to generate that value, so I get to share in that value generation, okay? As the owner of the land that all that airport activity on, whatever, I get to share in some of that value that's been created. Does that make sense? So that's what investing is like, hey, I'll throw in my bit to this, you guys throw in your bit and we'll share in that. The management will get their fee, the employees will get their fee, the shareholders buying the capital will get their fee as well. And so in any business, you've got your customers, the people who get the benefit and therefore supply the commodity exchange to pay for that. And then that's shared between the employees, be they management or workers, right? And then the shareholders who supplied the capital in the first place and so on, right? And as long as you keep that balance between those three, that enterprise will be successful. As long as it's doing something people find valuable enough, and as long as people are being paid well enough, and the shareholders are getting their reasonable return, then that thing will survive and continue. Similar, as long as that utility asset's being utilised in a way compared to the potential productive use of that capital in other ways, right? There's no, horse and cart manufacturing factories anymore, right? Because they're not valuable enough to, okay. So as long as that utility's still there, the toll road or whatever, then it's still going to create value that can be shared and be sustainable. Does that make sense? So really investing is just that. It's taking some of your productivity to say, I don't want to be productive my whole life. I'd rather stick it somewhere else and share in other people's productivity.
Yep.
The money I get as an investor, as the owner of the asset or a shareholder in the company, is a share in other people's productivity.
And you're giving them your productivity because you're like, I've just worked.
Correct.
I've deployed mine.
Yeah. Well, so again, money is productivity.
Yeah.
Okay. So the only question is whose productivity, and when. Okay. So whenever you see money, think productivity. Okay. And then it's the old poker rule, right? When you sit down at a poker table and after 30 seconds you haven't worked out who the mug is, it's you, right? So if you don't know whose productivity you're playing with when you're playing with money, it's yours. Okay, that's probably the safest rule. Okay, so whenever you've got money, it's your productivity. Okay, now if it's a loan from the bank, that's your future productivity. Okay, if it's savings you got from being the work you did this week or last month or whatever, then it's last week's or last month's or whatever productivity. Okay, if it's a loan, okay, if it's a promise of the future, a loan essentially, that's future productivity. Okay, if it's stuff you've already done, it's past productivity. Okay, if you don't know where it came from, it's probably your future productivity.
And then the businesses use their systems and they leverage the productivity to be more productive than it would have been by itself. Right?
So they create productivity because they sell goods and services at a price that's better than the input costs.
Yes, yeah.
Right? So you can think of a business. We'll use a business as a
so it's like investing would be. I've got a bunch of past productivity that I've stored up.
Yep.
I don't want to keep. I would like.
So let's see what I can store that in money.
Yeah.
Okay. But because really I want that productivity for future purchasing power resources.
But I'm also, I have all this past productivity.
Yep. So I can store it.
but
and then use it as I need to in the
but
future.
I'm using it, so that stored productivity is going to go down because
Correct.
I'm using it.
Correct.
So,
Or it's not going to change, right? Because there's no additional productivity being added to it.
sure.
So you think of cash, right, as physical cash.
Yeah.
There's a store of that productivity. Let's not worry about inflation of that just yet.
Yeah, sure. No,
It's store, right? Okay. So now, but all it's going to do, I'm just going to sit there and spend it.
Yeah, so you're just
over
going to
time.
slowly.
Yep.
So, but you might be like, well, I don't want to have to keep doing the things that, like, let's use money, right?
Yep,
I past productivity, I have this store of money.
Yep.
I don't want to have to keep doing those things.
Yep.
Because I'm retiring or I'm sick of it or I'm bored.
Yep.
So I'm going to give these guys that past productivity.
Yep.
And because their systems and the way they can leverage that
Yep.
makes way more than whatever I was doing.
Okay. So let's just go back a step.
Okay.
So I could sit there and say, right, I need this much resources. I need $1 million worth of resources. Because again, it's an accounting measure, not just a commodity
Yeah, and the
exchange.
productivity.
And I can say, therefore, all I have to do
Pays
is
for
I
resources.
have to find a way to be $1 million productive in excess of the productivity I utilise along the way, because I'm eating and I need some shelter and some clothes and stuff, whatever, right?
Yep.
So I need surplus productivity of $1 million. Okay. So, okay. Now, there's two ways I can do that. At this point in time, I can, let's say you want to retire at 30, okay, and you need $1 million, okay. So you either do between now and 30, you need to generate surplus productivity of $1 million, okay, or alternatively, you need to generate enough surplus productivity and where you can take that and hand it off to somewhere else, invest it, and share in someone else's future productivity, whereby you now don't have, you might now only have to do $500,000, right? Because over the rest of your life, if enough of your productivity has gone into someone else's and they're enhancing it for you,
Yeah.
okay, so your future purchasing power now will be greater because that productivity that you initially stored is now being productive, but you're not having to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So you're almost you're making your past productivity productive.
Further enhancing it,
Yeah,
correct.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
further enhancing. Think of it as
Because
enhancing, yeah?
like you can keep being productive and keep
Sure.
and keep storing the productivity,
Mhm.
but that stored productivity is not doing anything anymore. It's just sitting
All
there.
you're getting is that value.
Yeah.
And let's assume that value stays. We talk about inflation and stuff in a
Sure.
minute, but okay, but why do that?
When you can go-
So why charge up the battery,
You can make your productivity productive.
right? So that when later on when you don't want to, you're on the treadmill, on the generator, you want to stop pedaling or you want to pedal less, you can turn the battery on. Why not, if you do that, or alternatively, here's this other form of battery that if you send your excess current to that battery also has a solar panel, right? And as long as you kick that, then the solar panel kicks in as well, and now that battery fills up with the solar panel and you.
Yeah,
So-
and your excess energy that you're outputting is now making way more energy for you elsewhere. Well, through that other way.
It's being your energy of running the system to allow the solar panel to do its work is enhancing your total storage. Does that
Yep.
make sense?
Yep.
You think of it that way,
Yep.
right? So that's investing. So that's money under the mattress. That's investing.
Yeah.
Now, whether it's a solar panel, or maybe a solar panel is like buying a property or utility asset, and maybe a nuclear power station is the enterprise version. We can argue about those things, about
Yeah.
the potential of those things, but you can think of it in that way,
Yeah.
right? Is that enhancing? So my future purchasing power is going to be enhanced, not just preserved, and not just stored.
Yep.
Okay. Now, the difference between preserving and storing. Okay, so if the value of that money decays over time, and this is essentially what inflation is. Inflation is the destruction of purchasing power over time. We talk about how that occurs, but think of inflation as that. So in other words, if I just store my money, that $1 million in 10 or 20 or 30 years' time will be dollar for dollar, have less purchasing power.
Yes.
Okay,
It'll
because of
still be
inflation.
$1 million because the
Correct. The unit won't change.
The units won't change.
Yes.
But its ability to pay for resources will
Yes.
change.
Okay. However, you also need to keep in mind with that that what it buys will change in its nature, objectively and subjectively, particularly
Right.
objectively, through the impact of technology over time.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I said to you, I know we've had this discussion before, it's like 30 years ago, you went and bought a $20,000 car, right? Well, today, if you buy a $20,000 car, which you can still do, so if you just put your money aside and waited until today and bought your car for $20,000, you can still buy a car for $20,000.
Yeah.
Okay. But the nature of what you get in that situation is a significantly better car for $20,000 than was even available for $100,000.
I was going to say the $20,000 car now is better than the $100,000 car when you started storing the $20,000.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so in some senses, there is value in that delay because things do get better over time, especially if through the impact of technology.
Yeah.
So even if there might be inflation in terms of dollars, there is also deflation in
Good
relation
things
to
get
technology.
cheaper because we get better at making them.
Well, the thing itself creates more value per unit of expense. Think of it that way, like a computer. Like I've been paying $3,000 for a computer, for a laptop, in fact, I probably don't pay $3,000, but let's say $3,000. So I've been
10
spending
years.
$3,000 on every single laptop I've ever bought costs $3,000.
And so the price hasn't changed, but what that can do versus 10 years ago.
Even my very first one, 30 years ago.
Sure.
Or however long ago it was, right?
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, you buying a computer 30 years ago is probably more expensive just because not many people had computers. So getting into that would have been, it's $5,000 back then. And it
Correct.
wouldn't.
Yeah. Right. So
Spending less.
So whenever you hear the inflation thing, and that's you always need to be mindful of the price of thing versus the value of something. And it gets back to productivity. So again, whenever you think about something, don't just think of it in money terms because money is just productivity. You've got to think in how much of my productivity am I committing to this thing? Okay, and because that's how I pay for everything. Now, depending on how much of my surplus productivity I can have available, especially earlier, means I can deploy more of that into other people's productivities. And if I can deploy some of my productivity into with people who are hyper productive, then I can massively enhance my productivity. So if I'd invested in Coca-Cola and McDonald's and Disney or whatever, like when Warren Buffett did, because he invested some of his surplus productivity into people who were hyper productive as opposed to people who were very unproductive and went broke, okay, then he's massively enhanced his future purchasing power because of the productivity that he saddled up with. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's always someone's productivity. So whenever you're investing, and when we look at investments and how we pick investments, well, that's what we're looking for. We're looking at how productive are these people, these collective enterprises or utilities, how productive are they? How much more productive will they be in the future relative to other things we could do with that capital?
And it's not how many hours they spend at the office in terms of their productivity. It's
no,
how much resource can they generate, I guess.
Correct. And so there's lots of, and we can talk about this when we talk about some economic numbers.
I guess when you, definition-wise, when we talk about productivity here, that is output measured in terms of...
So let's talk about that. It's a little bit of a digression, and it's a leap forward to some degree, but it's a good example. So, so GDP, okay, gross domestic product,
right,
is the measure of productivity. It's the most, let's say, universal or most quoted measure of productivity.
Yep.
Okay, now, what is that measure? Okay, this is a little bit of a simplification, but it's close enough to real. Okay, so the GDP is adding up the prices of the transactions involved in the goods and services in a particular economy in a particular period of time.
in the market.
Okay, so if we said the Australian GDP in Australia now, Australian GDP, it basically is a sum of, let's say, the last 12 months, okay, the sum of the value of those transactions, say average per day or however you want to measure it, but essentially you add up all the transactions in various markets, you add up their value, and then you say that's the GDP, that's the production of that country. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It made enough things, right, and sold enough things, transacted them, because if there's no transaction, there's no measurement, right? And so you can think of like you at home and you made all these arts and crafts and you took them to the local fair and you didn't sell anything. So you have zero impact on GDP.
Yes.
Because you didn't sell anything. There's no way to capture in the week that you did that.
At that specific time that they're measuring.
Okay. So if you do all that, you don't sell anything for a year.
And they might measure it and be like zero.
It's zero because there's no transaction.
And then the next day you sell it all.
Okay. So again, but the idea is over time, the myriad of different timings of those things even themselves out to some degree.
Sure.
But however, right, just let me finish that point. Yep. However, understand that the measure is the sum of all the transactions based on what people decided to do over whatever particular period of time.
Yep.
So if everyone's buying yachts, right, then GDP could go up. If everyone's buying, Vegemite, not so much. Does that make sense?
I guess what I was, like, definition-wise, when we're talking productivity is the result of your deployment of what you were saying, your human capital, or the deployment of that.
Yeah, but it's the measured one, right?
Sure, because I guess what I was trying to get at is when you hear productive, you think people working.
Yep.
Let's say that.
Yep.
And amount of time or isn't productivity. It's the output at the end of the day, if that makes sense. So, for example, you and I, we're doing the same job.
Yep.
You work 12 hours in that day, and I work 2. You may look at that and be like, oh, he's more productive because he's spending more time doing it. At the end of the day, we did the same. Like, okay, let's say we have to sign forms all day. We just sign a form, put it in a tab, sign a form, put it in a tab. I do all of mine in 2 hours. You take 12 hours. You look more productive because you're there all day, and I did 2 hours. At the end of the day, we've done the same amount of forms. It's the same productivity.
Well, it depends. Okay, because productivity is a function of input, not just output.
Okay.
Okay, so if we get paid the same,
yep,
and we occupy the same office space,
yep,
and all those costs,
like we sit next to each other,
then we are the same productivity.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. In the measure that accumulates into the outcome.
Yes.
Now, clearly we're not.
Sure.
Okay, and so a lot of the arguments when it comes back to things like criticism, say the measure of GDP, is GDP really a measure of a country's wealth?
Yeah.
It doesn't measure domestic services. Like for a big chunk of your life, your mum stayed home.
Yes.
And just did house stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe bookkeeping something aside, but did house stuff. None of that made its way into GDP.
No.
Okay. Except to the point that it made me more productive.
Sure.
So I could do more things and float in that way, but it didn't come in the same sort of way. So keep in mind that the GDP doesn't capture all versions of value because as a family, or certainly as a couple, we decided between us that was a way better use of resource because the subjective value of her doing that versus her going and getting a job and me doing it, or some other sharing, or more childcare, or using family, what are the other versions of raising a family you could do, right? We subjectively decided that was more valuable to us than something that would have been objectively measured, like childcare, a nanny.
Sure, but so all of those things domestically have value in the sense of, like they add value.
They are using productivity to create resources.
But, so like let's say you have a household.
Yes.
And let's say you make bread.
Yep.
If you and mum both work, you can do 10 loaves.
Yep.
But you have to use 8 loaves to look after the kids and stuff like that.
Yep.
So you have a surplus of 2 loaves.
Yep.
And so you decide collectively, you can make really good loaves at a better rate or whatever. Or let's say you make 6 and she makes 4. So it's like, okay, you make more loaves quicker, so you do that. I'll look after the kids and stuff like that. so you can just focus on making loaves instead of like we finish making our loaves and we have to both.
Yeah, if she covered 6 of those loaves and we only need to now sell 2
Sure,
to cover, we're
but
better
wouldn't
off, right?
that, so let's use like mum as a resource, wouldn't that just be like part of your productivity? So wouldn't your output, wouldn't she then just encompass your output, like you're a team instead of separate? So all of those services just allow you to not have to spend as much as your productivity. So isn't it still a decent measure? Because
So the GDP is a good measure for what it's trying to do.
yes.
Okay, however, the criticisms...
I guess why do you need to have, so the criticisms,
Yes.
why would you need to have those bits of value, like looking after the kids and
No, you
everything
don't.
like that?
No.
Yeah,
because of what that's trying to measure, it's not an... Okay, but
because at the end of the day,
to that.
it's the productivity that matters, right?
Well, no. Keep in mind, now we got to define productivity. I would define productivity, okay, as creating resources.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, is a stay-at-home mum productive?
Yes.
Okay. Is she productive, or mum? Anyone who's stay-at-home mum, is she productive? Okay. Yes, she is, because she creates things that are of value.
Yes.
Okay. Now, are those things monetized?
Not directly.
Okay. Well, they're not at all. There's no trade of that productivity.
Well, if those values,
Yes.
so if that,
Does she allow me to be more productive?
Yeah.
Yes. But
but that's an input into your productivity, right?
to some degree, but not a measured input.
Sure.
Because GDP would measure my work hours
Sure.
and the money that I earned.
Yes.
That's all it measures. It doesn't say, oh, by the way, all these really productive people have wives at home
Sure.
and teenage kids who are also mowing lawns and doing something. You know what I mean?
But then,
But
you'd be a pool of everyone's productivity
sure,
because you're the actual
but keep in
output.
mind not necessarily, because there's so many choices involved in that.
Sure.
So let's say, going back to maybe not quite your bread example, but similar to that, and say, so let's say that because of the resources we wish to consume to set the style of life we want to live, then I have to work super hard, or I don't have to work very hard at all, can vary dramatically, right? I work 4 days a week, she looks after kids at home, and we got plenty, right? So the economy would have more output if I worked 5 days a week.
Yes.
If I worked a job that I could be more measurably productive in terms of the dollar value I could charge for the services and the value I create, I could create more value.
And that's where you
I could be a doctor and make $1 million a year.
and
but
that's
I've
the scale
chosen
of
to be,
productive, hyper-productive, how people utilise their own.
which can vary and drastically change over time.
Yes.
Okay. And then also, yeah. So I guess my point is when we look at these measures, be it GDP or whatever, you've got to understand. So a lot of people criticise these measures maybe because they don't understand them, or they try to use them in ways that they're really not intended, or they have very low fidelity at best.
Yeah,
right?
and you're not.
So is the GDP a good measure of the productivity economy? Yes, to a degree, but extremely limited.
Yes.
And so when someone says, "Oh, but it doesn't take account of all these things," it's like, great. Therefore, don't use it to try and
Yeah,
measure.
and it's not taking away from the value of those things. It's just not a good way to measure those things.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not calling stay-at-home mums unproductive. It's kind of built into the productivity of whoever's doing the work. So it's like, why would you? You don't need to factor that in.
Correct. Well,
that's not taking away
to the degree that it matters in terms of that measure.
in whatever measure. Yeah, and it's not taking away from the value that create. It's like it's unnecessary to factor.
Correct.
in.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I guess the point of all of this discussion here is understanding resources are the result of a process,
Yep.
i.e., productivity.
Yes.
Okay. And the more productive we are, that productivity is really a measure of the resources we can create. How well we can measure that productivity, how great a job your mum does as a homemaker that creates an environment that makes us all productive, turns you into a superstar and your brother into a superstar, we become hyper-productive people in the future. None of that can be measured at that point in time.
No,
anyway.
of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So being caught up in those measures to try and capture something that is, catching water out of waterfall, is a lot of people waste their time on it and get distracted by it. And particularly we get into, how economists like to talk about things. what I would call sort of almost using the tell the truth, using the truth to tell lies. Okay, using things out of context, using things that are inappropriate in terms of measures, or criticizing something because it doesn't do something that it's inherently not designed to do. Okay, it's like, oh, we shouldn't use GDP as a measure of wealth because it doesn't account for this, and it's not the right measure anyway. It's more about how happy people are.
GDP is not trying to measure happiness.
Correct. Exactly right. Okay. All right. So we now know what investing is, right?
Yes.
Investing is essentially handing over some of your productivity in a way that shares in other people's productivity.
Making your productivity productive.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep.
100%. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So anytime you're doing that, you're investing. Okay. Now one of the big mistakes people make, I think, in understanding things is they think that investing is when they put money to work, okay, and they think trading is when they're buying and selling something in a short space of time, okay. But time is not a factor as to whether you're an investor or a trader, okay. So a trader is trying to change the value of something in some way, okay, so that they have created value by that change. So they're assembling components into a product. They might be simply moving something from one place to another. We go back to that water example. Water in the ocean, not worth anything. Fresh water in the middle of the desert, for your birds, right?
Or it's water out of the tap.
Yep.
Free.
Or
water in the servo.
Food in my refrigerator.
$5.
You know?
Water on an airplane. $10.
Exactly.
Yep.
Okay. Right. So there's lots of different ways.
Same inherent resource.
The same inherent. What would you say? Same inputs.
Yes.
In terms of the physical nature.
Yes.
But not the same inputs in terms of the total product.
No.
Because yes, a good example. Yeah. So water at your tap at home versus a bottle of water at the airport versus a bottle of water on the plane, not even remotely the same product.
No.
They can look the same if you don't understand the nature of what goes into a product.
Yeah, and they can have the same. You can assign the same value to the, like, benefit of having.
They may be of minimal difference in benefit to you.
Yes.
Okay. Because you can be not thirsty in a plane.
Yeah.
And dying of thirst at home.
Sure.
Right? You've been in a garden all day, you smoke or whatever, and you're like, I'm dying of thirst, and that water's really valuable to you, right? Mm. Whereas you're well hydrated before you got on the plane, you don't need any more on the plane, right? So that's not the value. So the value is always a subjective thing to you, not just an objective thing.
Yeah. Okay. How badly do you want that?
But what is objectively true, okay, is that the water in the plane is of more value because of what's required for it to be there.
Sure, the cost of the good being there is more because of where it is. Like, you have to factor in the
correct
freight.
Okay. And so people commonly people misunderstand, and we'll get into why this matters in trading in a minute, but people therefore misunderstand the price of something varying drastically from, the supermarket as I left home to the airport kiosk before I get on the plane to buying it from Virgin or Qantas or whoever on the plane, and the price has gone from $1 to $3 to $7, and it's the same bottle of water. And people look at that and say, some people will look at that and say, oh, that's ridiculous that it costs that much, right?
Yeah, but it's
thinking it's the same product.
It's not the same bottle of water.
Okay, but most importantly, the equation's always, is it of that value to anybody at that point in time? At that point in time, because if it's never, right, because you've got to understand, so what is price? What's the function of price? Price does two things to you, okay? It tells you everything you need to know, okay, about the choices people have collectively made up until that point in time, as well as you can best establish in relation to that product in that environment.
Right.
Okay. What I mean by that is, let's take the bottle of water in the plane. If the bottle of water in that plane could not be reliably sold for that price, it would not be there.
No.
Okay, they'll very rapidly go, we're putting these bottles on planes, no one's buying them, let's stop wasting fuel and effort putting bottles on planes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the market will very rapidly tell Virgin, that price is too high, okay, therefore it's not worth having.
Even the dude dying of thirst isn't paying for that bottle of water.
He'll wait until he lands.
Yep.
Okay, it's not worth. Okay, because prices, okay, are not costs.
No.
Prices are what pay for costs.
Yep.
Okay, now, but they're not the only way to pay for costs. Okay, so if prices don't pay for costs, right, then costs will be met some other way. So if the cost of putting that bottle on the plane up there is higher than what people are willing to sell, okay, and therefore Virgin says, oh, look, it costs us $7 to have this thing up there, but we can't sell it for more than $5, we'll keep selling it for $5, that $2 gets paid some other way.
Someone pays for it.
Okay.
Yeah, Virgin has to pay for it. Yeah.
All right, so what are the ways they can do that? Well, they can make the water of lower quality.
Yeah.
Okay, they can make it more scarce.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone gets a bottle of water if they want one, right?
They can ask, or they, substitute.
They can
switch
require
supplier.
you to pay for it, book it in advance, so they don't put it on the plane unless they know you're going to buy it. Right?
Sure.
There's a bunch of different ways. So convenience, quality. There's a bunch of different ways where you can change the cost of a product.
Yep.
Okay, because if the prices don't cover the costs, then they must be covered in some other way.
Yep.
Okay, really good example they talk about, people like to admit this, but healthcare is a really good example, right?
Mm.
There's 3 bits to healthcare, right? People say, oh, healthcare should be free, without really defining what that is. Okay, but there's 3, you can think of healthcare in 3 different dimensions. You can think of the quality of healthcare, okay? You can think of the price of healthcare, right? The cost of healthcare, right? And then you can think of the availability. Okay. You can have 2 of those 3 things, but you cannot have all 3. Okay. You can't have universal healthcare that's low cost and high quality. Can't do it. You can have universal healthcare that's low cost, but it's not going to be high quality. Okay. You can have high quality and universal, it's not going to be cheap. Does that make sense? Those 3 things don't go together. Okay, there's a natural law of physics, if you like, that fits into those things. And most people don't understand the relative trade-off of those things. Say, oh, we should have universal healthcare. It's like, great, what do you mean by that? Do you mean that any technology that someone can invent that might be useful in diagnosing an illness or injury should be available in case somebody wants it, right? In other words, the highest possible quality, okay?
And again, the prices pay for costs. There's going to be a cost. No one's paying the price for it. Like,
you pay it in other ways.
Then you pay it in other ways.
So places like Canada and the UK, right? Good example, even in Australia. So how do you pay? So there's lots of stuff in Australia that's free. Free. How do you pay for it?
How do you pay for it?
Yeah. How do you pay for free healthcare in Australia?
Tax.
No. That's how the price pay. But if the healthcare is free in Australia, okay, and yet the cost isn't covered, how else can you pay for it? You can lower the quality,
and
you can lower the availability.
Yep.
Right? So in other words, you can have that, you need a knee operation, it's free. It's a 2-year waiting list.
Yep.
Right? So it's going to be, if the prices don't cover the cost, by definition, it's going to be less available. Right?
But if it's free, then unless the components are also free, there is no price that will cover the cost. Because the price is 0, there's always going to be cost.
So in this example, we're saying, as the person consuming the healthcare, I don't have to pay for it. Okay.
Yeah.
So the price is still paid, via the taxes government doing. We can talk about that in a bit more detail. Okay, but if I don't pay enough taxes to cover the cost of it, and I don't personally pay for it, then there's not enough to cover the cost.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if there's not enough to cover the cost, then the only other way I can pay for it is lower quality or lower supply.
Yep.
Okay, less people get it.
Yep.
Okay, in other words, waiting lists blow out.
Yep.
In other words, lower quality of that service.
And if you want it more available, and you want to keep the same quality,
yes,
then you have to pay more.
Correct.
Right, so the cost will go up.
Correct.
And then it's all well and good for you who's not paying anything at the moment, but someone bears that cost.
100%. Yeah.
So that's just who bears the cost and when and how.
Whether the social contract of saying that's fine, then we're all happy to wait. That's a different story, right?
Or we're all happy to collectively pay to cover
more
the
to
cost.
do so. Yeah.
So then everyone thinks it's free because you don't get the bill.
Well, but the other part of that problem,
paying for
right,
it.
is if
Yeah,
you
that's
don't
a
get the
whole
bill,
tax
we can talk
conversation
about the
later. Yeah.
timing of payments. But the other thing is that people always overconsume things that are free. It doesn't cost you anything.
Of course, may as well just
So the other thing you do by making something
got
free
a headache,
is you
let's get a
massively
CAT scan, just check it out.
you move up the supply, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a whole different thing. But I guess the important part of that is that prices aren't the only way to pay for costs, but all costs must be paid.
Yes.
Go back to the example of the bottle. If Virgin don't pay for that cost in some other way, Virgin disappear, and that's the price.
Yep.
They go broke.
Yep.
Okay, the cost must be paid. Someone's paying.
And
So
then
again,
they go broke. You lose an airline.
let's you later.
There's more demand, and then
all the
other
implications
airlines are
of
more
doing so.
expensive, and then everyone who's flying
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
has to
But
collectively
by the same
pay more.
token, if Virgin cannot create enough relative value in flying people around and all that sort of stuff, because if the to the degree the market's free and says, okay, well at that price, I'm willing to do so. Because it all comes down to how much of your productivity are you willing to sacrifice for that thing.
Yep.
Okay, so it's one of the examples people often talk about. People in private jets, for example, right? So would we? Yeah, I'm going to fly to Queensland next week. Would I rather book a Qantas flight, go through the designated airports and do that sort of stuff, or would I rather take a private jet or a helicopter?
Private jet every day of the week.
Okay, so let's say a helicopter, I don't know what it costs, but let's say it costs 15 grand for me to take a helicopter or private plane, whatever it is, to get from where A to B. How much of my productivity does that represent? Right? Now, if I'm going there to meet up with a mate, right, who's on his deathbed, is about to die, I might be willing, that might be worth it to me. If it's just, going for a holiday or going for a business meeting or something like that, and I'm going to visit a client and that client pays me $3,000 a year and I have to do a whole bunch of work for that, so my profit on that client's like $300, I'm not going to spend 15 grand going to see that client.
Sure.
Right? But if I'm the CEO of, I don't know, Tesla, well, I'm Elon Musk, right? Or I'm a CEO of Ford, or I'm doing some deal with, China or some big international consortium or BHP or something like that. And me being at that meeting is the difference between a, $1 billion contract or not, then that might be an absolute bargain, especially because I can work on the flight the whole way there. I'm not interrupted. I don't have to get caught in the airport, etc. So my productivity may be well and truly worth flying in a private jet.
Mm-hmm.
And the price of private jets, as they come down, means more people are productive at that price.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So price also has an impact in terms of productivity.
Yeah, I mean you can intercity private jet in Australia now for like $3,000, $4 grand, if you get on like the return legs.
Yeah, right.
But like
someone else has already gone and
but Melbourne, Sydney, Sydney, Brisbane, those kind of three.
Yep.
They're
because
like,
the more people are doing that.
and there's now there's pretty much always a return leg.
Yeah, right.
So you're like,
yeah. Whereas like 30 years ago, it didn't.
And like we were talking about before, that same technology 20 years ago, flying that private jet,
cost a bomb. Yeah, modern plane uses less fuel.
Yeah.
But keep in mind that also, now we're getting into the different realm, but the reason why they can be so relatively less expensive is because you're now operating at that marginal cost.
Yes.
The plane's got to get back anyway.
Yep.
Right? So if they can cover more of that, and again, that's one of the people misunderstand when they look at like airline pricing, right? And they go, oh, I'm flying to Brisbane next week and it's $500. It's like, yeah, it's a Taylor Swift concert.
Yeah.
So every man and his dog's flying.
That happened to me the other
right,
day.
Okay. Like, it's ridiculous that the price could change so much. It's like, prices tell you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
There is a limited supply of seats in planes going on a Friday from A to B. Okay.
That actually happened to me because we were producing in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And my flight there, she was playing in Sydney.
Right.
So, and I was coming from Sydney. My flight there was $86
to Melbourne.
To
because
Melbourne.
they had to send planes to pick people up. Yep.
My flight back was $470.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the? And so as soon as I saw that, I'm like, this is what the hell's going on. And then Taylor Swift playing in Sydney, you're like, wow. So every man and their dog from Melbourne obviously couldn't get a Melbourne ticket, so they're going to Sydney or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And I need to be there for work.
Yes.
So, I mean, I've got to pay.
You got to go.
And then you think about it, you're like, oh, you know, $500, $250 both ways actually isn't too bad. But it feels outrageous paying $400.
So you see the outrage of that. It's like, oh, they're price gouging and they're doing all these things or whatever, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So especially a business like Qantas, I can assure you, Qantas are very acutely aware that the lower their prices, the more money they make.
Sure.
And so there's two types of businesses, right? There's the margin business, which is the volume business. So there's a margin business in terms of make as much margin you can, and there's a volume business in terms of trying to keep your margin as low as possible, because most of your costs are relatively fixed.
Yep.
And therefore, the more you scale, exponentially.
And a lot of those big enterprises are very much scale businesses.
100%. Yeah. Scale, and you can see this, right, is that the businesses that make the most money always are the ones that charge the lowest prices.
Yeah, I mean,
McDonald's,
Woolworths are like
Amazon.
4 or 5% EBIT like that.
Yeah, the margin's nothing, right? Yeah. Okay. So volume, because of how it scales,
price
trumps
of fuel goes up by 1%.
And you can go really high margin. You can go Ferrari. You can go whatever, handbags or whatever, right? But you can't. There's only so much supply at that level.
Yeah.
Okay. So you cannot be the biggest company in the world charging ridiculous margins.
No.
Now you can be a reasonably successful company, sure, all those things, but the best way to build a business is by keeping your price as low as possible, because it increases. Now, again, because people are sacrificing their productivity for that thing. And at that price, not worth it to me, but at that price...
Amazon, right?
Okay.
And so, like, with the airlines, I just think, especially now with technology, we're all very connected. We all live really far away. We're not in our little town anymore. Like, for example, for airlines, my brother lives in Brisbane. If I want to see my brother, Qantas has a flight for $80. That's worth it. I can go and see him. I'll go for a weekend. Awesome. Flight's $350. No longer really like, can you warrant that? And it's like, am I going to spend $700?
No, but people look at that variability in pricing, right?
So I guess what I'm saying is, when it's at that $80, it becomes way more accessible to way more people for things like that. So, and they're going to get way more volume.
The most profitable airline in history is Southwest Airlines in the US.
Yeah.
Okay. And Southwest Airlines, when they launched, right, they're a famous case study in Good to Great. Southwest Airlines, when they saw it, they decided that their competition was not going to be other low-cost airlines. Their competition was the Greyhound bus. Right? That's always been their competition.
Yeah.
How do we get people off bus and into the plane?
Yeah.
So they only fly very specific routes domestically in the US.
Yeah.
Okay. Where they know, and they do things like amazing turnaround times, and it's amazing business, right?
Yeah.
But they're a very famous example of business said, well, we're not trying to compete with other airlines and therefore undercut those things. We're trying to compete with people who would take the Greyhound bus and pay $50.
Yeah.
But would they take a plane for $100?
Yeah.
We can get that experience if we can make it work.
Yeah.
And they just made a business that serviced those people at that price.
Yeah.
And they're by far the most successful airline. One of only 2 airlines that have been consistently profitable.
Yeah.
But by far the most. Not only the most profitable airline ever, one of the most profitable businesses of any kind.
Yeah, okay.
In an industry that, without them and Qantas, like everyone else loses money.
Yeah, it's like the car industry.
The total industry loses money, but take them out. Okay, they're the only 2 that ever made money consistently. So
I know the modern version, or at least what I think what they're trying to do is Ryanair in the UK. Yeah, and the CEO, because he's famous of being like, oh, Ryanair quality sucks, or whatever, or the seats are too close to the leg room or whatever. He's like, we're trying to get as many people between 2 locations as cheap as possible.
Yep.
And so he's already been floating the idea of like the half the cabin is stand up.
Yes.
With like a bus. He's like, because the flight between the UK and Scotland, or the UK and France, is like 40 minutes.
In the UK.
So yes, you know what I mean. Sorry. Intercity.
London to Paris.
Or London to Paris is like, I don't know what it is, but it's 40 minutes.
Yep.
People can stand on a bus for 40 minutes.
Yep.
Also, the boarding time for people when they're standing is like,
they walk
They walk on. They're never going to have heaps of bags in them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so we can fit way more people standing. Where our prices can be. It's like, oh, Ryanair's quality is so bad. It's like, would you pay? You can go from the UK to Paris for $30.
Yep.
And you have to stand.
So Tiger was an airline here for a while. Mostly they operated out of Melbourne. And I think they certainly did Canberra. They did Brisbane and Sydney. Anyway, they were very much that model, right? And so they were like $35, $50 often for a flight. Okay, but it was a horrible experience. I was forced to do it once. I'd pay so much more to never have to do that again, right? And they end up going break because there just wasn't enough market. But again, the market
Australia's just not really big enough, right?
The market tells you if that's the case, right?
Yeah.
But again, going back, I want to go back to that surge pricing at the Taylor Swift thing because it's a really good example, right?
Yeah.
And so people look at that and they think, oh, that's just Qantas gouging, right? That's just Qantas trying to do something. First of all, the Qantas probably aren't the best example of this because you would say that they've, what would you say? You would say that they've stretched the friendship on their social license on more than one occasion because they don't really operate in a particularly competitive market.
Sure.
Okay. However,
and is
they're still not idiots, right?
No.
Okay.
Is there a world where so the demand goes up, so the price has to go up, but they go, usually it's $50, let's say that, but Taylor Swift's on, demand's crazy, so really it's $250. Is there a world because they don't have the competition or whatever, they go, oh well, we can just put it at $350?
Not really.
Okay. Why?
Not really. Okay. Well, because keep in mind that they don't have unlimited planes and aircrew and slots at airports. And so think of everything involved in adding an additional plane to their network.
Sure.
Sydney to Melbourne.
Oh, yeah. I guess what I'm asking is, do they take advantage of times where it's like that and just add a couple percent on there?
So what they are trying to do all of the time is run as many algorithms and spreadsheets and stuff as they can. It's one of the accounting partners I worked with way back in the day. He worked with a business that did that analysis for Qantas.
Yeah.
Okay. The math will blow your mind.
Yeah.
In trying to work out what the price of a seat should be in an airline, extrapolate out. Okay. Because of all that, so you just see it from the utility of, and keep in mind the anchoring of last time I did this, it cost me $300.
Yeah, but the complexity of the inputs to that whole,
without knowing availability of aircrew, availability of slots and thing, the prices, there's so many different variables.
What the wind's doing, how much extra fuel you need for like a trip Sydney to Melbourne.
Right. So it's right. So there's all that degree of complexity. So what they do know,
how much checked baggage they have. Yeah.
What they know is they know the resource allocation they'll have available on a given day.
Yeah.
And if the demand exceeds that, okay, what else do they do? How else do you differentiate between there's 1,000 people that want to get on that plane, there's 100 seats? How should you? How should you make that?
I guess the only way is who really wants it.
Who is most willing? And prices reflect that instantly.
Sure.
And so what that tells you is it really worth you adding to the congestion on that day to go to your thing? Or waiting to the next day when they're all flying the other way and copping another $80? Maybe you're better off paying the same price but getting another night in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Right? So everyone involved in that equation gets to make their own subjective value decision. And the end result of that is a ticket at $482.
Sure. But the total inputs for that full plane,
yes,
surely it hits the threshold of the plane's full, so that would be the absolute ceiling of their price. Why would that? Or do they just keep going, or how much are people willing to pay?
So in real time, they want to keep adjusting that.
Sure.
Because they're guessing it to what the resource allocation that will really be.
But once it hits that threshold of the plane's full.
Yes. So they've already fixed in their revenue. They have not fixed in their costs. Because what if the plane gets turned around, can't land?
Yeah.
Right? What if it gets delayed a bit in air traffic control and lands at now those aircrew will miss a connecting flight and that'll get delayed, or now they have to stay overnight because they're too tired, or
there's complexity. And so I wonder if you ever see I guess maybe it does, where the price and then drops down because I wonder if there's the exact point
Google
where they
see,
where they have enough to put on another plane and then the price drops.
You'll see that, for example, I know you'll know why I know this at the moment, but the optimum time to book an overseas flight is about 2 months out.
Right.
Because you might think, oh, I'm going in a year, I may as well book it now. Surely now is it? No.
No, because they have
Now
no idea.
they have no idea how many planes they should fly, how full they should be.
Yeah.
Right? They have no idea.
2 months out.
2 months out, they're like, Jesus, this one's not filling up.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's surge it a bit, because the last thing
Yeah,
we want to
it's
do is a plane to
complexity
take. Okay. And then if the plane's getting full,
Which is why there's all those like Webjet sales and all the stuff that pops up, because they're like, all right, we need a.
that's why you went to Korea for like $1.80.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah,
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes it. So I guess 2 months out, or if you don't care where you're going, absolutely.
Yeah,
last
yeah.
minute.
This plane's empty. So
Yeah.
Matt Armstrong did that, right?
Yeah.
Matty did that. We went.
Which, I mean, why we went to Korea, because we booked that Korea, like, because it was like the sales in Boxing Day, but you got to go before like March 5th or something like that. So it was like, you have to go in the next 2 months,
Yeah.
pretty much.
I have
so.
some clients who what they do is they do cruises. Love doing cruises, but they do the really high end ones. So they do like the $25,000 cruises, but they don't want to pay $25,000 on a cruise. But not everyone who does those cruises does the entire cruise.
Okay.
So what they do is they find a cruise that's going, I don't know, maybe not this one, but they say it's going London to Australia.
Yep.
They get on it in Singapore
It's a long way. Yeah.
to replace the people who left at Singapore.
Right.
Does that make sense? Because not everyone on a big cruise, the boat goes from here to here,
Yeah.
but they might sell that as different cruises, or they might sell it as one cruise that you know what I mean? So what they'll do is they'll go, oh,
Where's your empty leg?
Where's your
that's the
return?
private jet back.
that's
Yeah.
your $80 thing. Okay, so there's a bunch of different ways that business. Now, what do you know as the consumer? You know that that's everybody's best guess as what that price is.
Yeah.
Okay, now, the airline's got no idea.
Sure.
But they are infinitely better placed to make that decision than anyone else is.
Sure.
And most especially a third-party observer who later looks at it and goes, as a politician will do,
Yeah.
they're gouging, they're doing... Now,
But you have no idea at the time what the factors were, and the kind of the best guess. And the ones that guess poorly don't survive, I guess, would be the
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
yeah, yeah. So it's like, hey, we're pretty good at this now, guys.
And do I know that that was a reasonable price to charge?
Yeah, and if they're nefarious,
No, how do I know? How do
you know?
How do I know it's a reasonable price
If
to charge?
people pay for it.
Because it got sold.
Yeah.
Now, do I know that people paying that price would have preferred to pay less?
Of course.
Right? But that's not the equation, right?
Yeah.
The equation is what price are you paying versus the value you're getting, and you get to make that subjective decision
Yep.
without having to know anything about the infinite complexity that went into the price of that thing on that day.
You think of calculating the infinite complexity for the price has to be factored into the price as well. There's a million inputs.
And guessing that consistently over time is the difference between a CFO who's paid millions of dollars to run Qantas versus a CFO who used to run Tiger.
Sure.
Just in case that person watches this video. Like,
Maybe
you
maybe it's the same bloke.
but you know what I mean? Like there's so, yeah, maybe got out when the going was good. But you understand what I mean? So whenever you see surge pricing or price gouging, all this stuff around prices, and I know you know this because of in terms of gravity and how that landscape can change so dramatically, right?
Fuel levy goes up 4%. And
Right, and how you've got to try and preempt that because you don't want to do that to your consumer. Most businesses don't want to do that to consumers. They don't want to shock their consumers because that creates brand risk and damage.
Sure.
Right? Okay, but it's not the same price. That seat, for all intents and purposes, for you, that's a way to get from Sydney to Melbourne.
Yeah.
And for you, it's the same every time you want to go.
And for us, the reason we want to do it as cheap as we can, in terms of sell to our customers as cheap as we can, is not only because if we just hike the price up, they go, what the hell? But if we don't do that, someone else will.
100%.
And so...
The incentive's there to do so, yes.
And so unless we are Ferrari, where the people who are like, it doesn't matter what the price is, I'm buying it. Like, you know. And so we're always in the balancing point of like, we know exactly how cheap we can go and be sustainable. That doesn't mean that people don't come in below us.
Yes.
And then so we are either like, they're doing something, they're at a bigger scale, or they're doing something where they can make their costs cheaper than us.
Yep.
What is that? How do we find out how to do that ourselves?
Yep.
Or give them a couple months, they're not going to be around for very long because there's no way that's sustainable. And we see that all the time where it's like, no chance they can keep that price. And then, you know, in 2 months they drop off.
Yes.
And this is a whole different conversation, but they may be running the gamble of, at that price, we get enough consumers that love us that then when we do up the price.
So the discount of that is essentially the marketing. So
Yeah.
again, good
Anyway,
example.
that's a marketing
So
expense.
that's what's happened in very recent times when people look at the cost of living things as well, and separating some of these things
It's
out.
like how often are
So
they?
some prices have moved, and we can talk about the Christopher example in a minute because hopefully he'll watch it. But a really good example that I think is streaming services, right? So
Yep.
COVID came along, everyone got locked down, so there is no productivity, okay? But governments splashed money around, so they gave the appearance of productivity. So when a government hands money out
They use
and no one's being productive, whose productivity is that?
either people's past productivity that they've taken or people's future productivity that they've basically
Okay.
got a bunch of
Do
debt.
governments have surplus cash sitting around?
Our
The Chinese government does, but ours does
I
not.
was going to say our government debt would suggest no, we
Okay,
don't.
so if a government hands out money
Mm-hmm.
when no one's working,
Yes,
whose productivity is that?
the government's future productivity.
The government's future productivity.
Yeah, but that mean the government can't be productive.
So government productivity is literally an oxymoron.
Everyone's
right?
future productivity.
Governments cannot be productive. We
Pretty
can
much.
get into that.
Yeah,
argument
yeah.
in a second.
But what I'm saying is like, if they don't have money
Yep.
and they give a bunch of people's money out, they give a bunch of money
Okay, so
out.
there's no such thing as government money
No. So
because governments aren't productive.
sure,
Okay.
exactly.
Now, that does not mean, right, for the three people who watch this, jump on the comment section, right?
Yes.
But that does not mean that governments don't serve a function that allows for greater productivity had they not existed. That's a different
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, because we can get into government.
Okay,
Yeah,
so but governments themselves are not productive by definition. Okay,
yes,
okay.
but they can create an environment for productivity.
They can create an environment that would be more productive had they not been there and acted
Yes,
that way. So,
yes.
sorry. So it's definitely clear, I think causally clear, but it's definitely anecdotally enough to be clear that the right type of government enhances potential productivity. The US being the best example. The US most productive, okay. If you removed government from the US, you would not make that country more productive because it's
No.
got more productive as it's got better governance. Now,
Sure.
whether that's gone beyond or not, we can
Yeah,
argue.
and
But,
then
but back when the
where that
Wild West
lands.
was a thing,
Yes.
okay, and all countries did this. It wasn't until rule of law and property rights and all things. The more things you have, the more productive your economy is. Okay,
Yeah. Until you get to
but they're not productive.
yeah.
Okay, so people sacrifice some of their productivity to, let's say, government, to
Yep.
making and enforcing rules, essentially, right?
Yep.
So that we can all trade much more effectively and we can be more productive.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we're talking about COVID, so COVID, no one's productive. The government doesn't have any money sitting around, which means they don't have anyone's past productivity either.
Right.
All they can do
Is hand out future productivity.
is everyone's future
Right. So
productivity.
they're borrowing.
Which is a good gig for old people who may not be around for that future productivity.
We can argue about who pays for it, right? So again, it's whose productivity, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's different than old people's productivity. It's going to be okay. So we're going to do the relative social contract for those things. Okay, so when governments, okay, so what happened was all of this future productivity got spent.
Yep.
Okay, which means that has to be paid for, which means you're going to have less of your future productivity available to spend because
Yep.
you've already spent it.
Yep.
Okay.
And you can't just keep expending future productivity. Well, I mean, you can.
There's a natural balance and conflict in terms of that, but you're right. But the more of your future productivity you spend today, the less of it by definition is going to
That
be
you're
available
going to have.
Now,
Yeah, yeah. And then you won't be able to deploy that.
well, so the one caveat to that is if you do that in a way that enhances your potential, not your potential, that enhances your actual future productivity.
Yes.
Okay, we'll get into how debt works and stuff in a bit, but
Kind of investing debt, if that makes sense.
so using well,
Well,
let's
we
not
can
get
get-
distracted.
yeah,
okay,
sure.
but you can that can
Yes,
work. Okay,
yeah.
but where essentially you're not. Okay.
Government aren't doing that.
Combination of things. So that happened. Okay, and I'll
Yep.
only use streaming service example. So streaming services, pretty much a brand new thing.
Yep.
Okay, every man his dog launching a streaming service, or some of them were getting that way, and okay, so suddenly. You've got your Netflix and your Paramounts and your Disney Plus and your Stan and all those. Okay, so they all come out. They are also the nature of the models that are like, if we can get scale, okay, then that's a much more likely. First of all, there's only going to be so many players in the future market,
Yeah.
so we need to be there Okay.
Yep.
Second thing is, so we need to be dominant enough to be one of the potential winners. Okay. And we need the scale so that we can cover our relative costs much faster.
And that type of business, the costs are relatively fixed.
Yes.
Like
the early costs.
To make it like super simple.
Yep.
The for something like Netflix.
Yep.
And this is like a way oversimplification, but they have a catalogue, let's say 10 movies.
Yep.
That 10 movies, let's say that the cost of that is fixed.
Yep.
Doesn't mean the movies can't change, but they're always going to have 10 movies. So like a new movie comes out and they get rid of an old one and they put a new one on, but that...
Well, no, so
oversimplification.
No, so we'll use Netflix as an example, right?
Yeah.
So I suspect Netflix model, it definitely works this way, whether they thought it would, I suspect they did. Okay, so you think of Netflix as, okay, what do Netflix do? Okay, they provide access to content. So they can buy up that stuff and say, don't worry about buying DVDs, you can have it. There's not much in that, okay. But new content, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, now, so if you want to be and this is very much was Netflix thing. So Netflix were very much a content creator, and they said we want to make more content than anyone else, because then people will watch it. Okay. Now, let's say we'll keep the math simple. It costs $1 million to make a piece of content.
Yep.
Okay. So the cost of that, okay, spread across how many subscribers is a major driver of the relative productivity of the business.
Yes.
Okay. If you've got 1 million subscribers and you make one piece of content for $1 million, it's like $1 per subscriber.
Sure.
Okay. But if you've got 10 subscribers,
yeah.
Okay. So Netflix model is like, well, it's going to cost us an enormous amount of money to
and that's what I meant by it's fixed. It's like the catalogue costs the catalogue costs.
I wouldn't say it's fixed, but it's logarithmically scalable.
Yeah, and that's what I meant by it's an oversimplification.
Yeah,
obviously
so it's an exponential function, not a linear function.
It's way closer to fixed than it is to ridiculously variable.
It's basically a diminishing.
Yeah,
right?
and let's say that catalogue.
So the quicker they can get to whatever the thing was, the more likely the future costs were going to be contained and scalable. Okay, so that was essentially their model. Okay, and there's only so many players that will win, and we need to be there first. Getting that dominant position would be an advantage. That was okay.
And
so
keeping it cheap could get a lot of people.
Right, because the lower the price, the more people come in. Okay, and then also people fear to lose. You can incrementally get them, and so on and so on. So it was all part of a strategy. Now, there's no guarantee the strategy will work. There's no guarantee at the end they'll have enough subscribers who are willing to pay enough to make that thing work. But that's the entrepreneurial bet. Okay. As an end consumer, though, you get Netflix at $10 a month.
Sweet.
Now, let's say Netflix have done the math based on modelling, and they know that really the cost is they need to charge $100.
Yeah.
Okay. But there's no way you're going to 100 because there's 7 movies on there anyway, right? So they've got to get you to 100. They do the math and they take the bet that getting enough people at 10 and the number we will lose versus the value we can accumulate over time is we can get to that model, and we've done all our projections, that's our business model. Okay. This is the best way to do it as opposed to trying to do it any other way because we'll burn through cash. Okay. So as a result of that, all the people who think $10 is a good deal are in there. Some of those people will last through to the end. Many will drop off along the way. That's included in the scenario. Okay. But every man his dog doing that. But as an end consumer, you get that thing at $10. You're like, $10 a thing, well, I'll get $10 for that one, $10 for that. So I've got 5 of them now at $50. I can live with that because there's nothing else to spend it on, relatively, right? And they're all relatively cheap. Now, 2 things happen. First of all, there's now 7 or 8 or 9 of them. They've all put they're now to $10. They're all 25. Okay. I've consumed most of the value I got from the novel thing. There's only so much extra,
Yeah, and then it comes from like quality of content on there rather than
and also they didn't make any much extra content because they were all shut down too, right? So the real price of that product gets revealed to me 2 to 3 years down the track.
Yes.
Okay. But my anchor is $10.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if you look across many, many things that we consume in a modern world, from an iPhone to a laptop to a streaming service to a audio streaming, like a music streaming service to whatever, right? Okay, to the prescriptions, to the food, to all those sorts of things. The food, once upon a time we used to go and spend $200 on groceries and now it's $300. Okay. But when I spent $200, I got eggs, milk, cheese, fruit. Now I get my Muscle Chef, some protein drink. You know what I mean? Like I get
you get things
very, very different things. Okay, so there's a lot of these different equations that go into that relative cost of living.
Yeah.
But when you add that up, the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, that is a combination of those prices for that relatively comparable thing. We go back to the car. The price of the car hasn't changed, therefore its input to the CPI hasn't changed.
Yep.
Okay, even though it's dramatically different.
People look at things that haven't changed at all. Like an egg now is still an egg from 10 years ago. But that's when we get into the, well, is it? Because where does it come from? Like, what are the inputs to get that egg
Sure.
in Woolworths?
Yeah.
And people forget that. So now, pretty much any time, anywhere, you can get an egg.
Yes. Yeah.
Back
the
then,
availability.
so the egg may have been cheaper back then,
Yes.
but not all the time.
Yes. Correct. Sometimes.
I mean, eggs maybe not as great a
No, you're right.
But
well,
like
fruit
broccoli.
in season. Fruit in season.
Right.
Okay, so
now there's pretty much, you can get every piece of fruit at any point of the year.
Yes.
It's just where it comes from and
the
how much
price
it costs.
and the quality and
Yeah. So,
Let's just pause for a sec
yeah, I need to
because
pee.
we might need to reset this anyway.
Oh,